Some cartoon characters get watched and forgotten. The ones from SpongeBob SquarePants have been living quietly inside people for over 25 years. Not because the show is the funniest thing ever made, though it has its moments. Not because the animation is the most impressive, though the early seasons are genuinely beautiful to look at. But because something about the characters got inside people in a way that stayed. A certain kind of person always came back to SpongeBob. A different kind always came back to Squidward. Someone else never missed a Patrick episode. Someone else entirely spent every scene waiting for Gary to appear. And over time, people started noticing that this was not random. That the character you felt most drawn to, the one that felt a little too familiar, the one you maybe saw a little too much of yourself in, was telling you something quiet and specific about who you are. Tonight we are going to sit with that slowly, one character at a time. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. SpongeBob SquarePants. There is a moment in the Season 3 episode Rockabye Bivalve where SpongeBob, dressed in a little tie and carrying a briefcase, leaves for work in the morning with a kind of exhausted cheerfulness that is almost painful to look at directly. He waves goodbye at the door, he smiles, he goes. And somewhere underneath the joke, underneath the absurdity of a cartoon sponge playing house with a starfish, there is something quietly true about what it costs to keep showing up every single day with that much enthusiasm. The show does not comment on it. SpongeBob does not comment on it. He just goes to work, and the scene moves on, and the joke lands, and most people laugh. But a smaller group of people watching that moment feel something a little harder to name, something closer to recognition. If SpongeBob is your favorite character, that recognition is probably not a surprise to you. It might even be why you picked him. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on television since May 1st, 1999. He was created by Steven Hillenburg, a marine science educator who had spent years teaching people about ocean life before he turned his knowledge into one of the most successful animated shows ever made. Hillenburg designed SpongeBob to be genuinely, completely, almost aggressively optimistic. Not optimistic in the way motivational posters are optimistic, where the feeling is thin and the words are too big. Optimistic in the way a person is optimistic when they have decided, somewhere deep inside themselves, that being hopeful is simply what they are going to do every single day, regardless of what happens. And a lot happens to SpongeBob. He gets laughed at. He gets taken advantage of. Squidward rolls his eyes at him constantly. Mr. Krabs uses his loyalty without much hesitation. Patrick, despite being his best friend in the world, forgets about him with a kind of cheerful ease that would devastate most people. SpongeBob fails his driving test over and over and over, across hundreds of episodes, in front of the same teacher who has watched him fail so many times that she has developed what the show eventually frames as genuine psychological trauma just from being near him. And SpongeBob keeps going. He comes back the next day. He smiles at Squidward. He makes the Krabby Patties. He blows the bubbles. He feeds Gary. He does it all again. People who love SpongeBob tend to understand that feeling from the inside. There is a personality pattern that researchers and psychologists sometimes describe as high agreeableness combined with high conscientiousness. In plain terms, it means being someone who genuinely wants to do a good job, genuinely wants the people around them to be happy, and genuinely struggles to put themselves first when doing so might disappoint someone else. SpongeBob scores extremely high on both of those traits in every serious analysis of his character. He is diligent almost to a fault. He cares about his work at the Krusty Krab in a way that goes well beyond what the job requires or what Mr. Krabs has ever deserved from him. He is loyal to people who have not always earned that loyalty. He gives and gives and gives, and the giving does not seem to wear him down the way it would wear down most characters, most people, because the giving is not a strategy for him. It is just who he is. That is the thing that people who connect most deeply with SpongeBob tend to recognize in themselves. Not the silliness, not the laugh, not the square pants or the pineapple house or the jellyfish nets. Those things are easy to love from a distance. What the SpongeBob people recognize is the particular quality of his care, the way he means it, the way it costs him something to mean it that much, even when the show never quite stops to acknowledge that cost directly. There is a running thread through the series, most visible in the first 3 seasons, when Hillenburg was still guiding the show's emotional direction most closely, where SpongeBob's optimism is not presented as a simple character trait, but as something closer to a choice, an ongoing, daily, effortful choice that he makes against evidence. In episodes like Rock Bottom, where he is stranded alone at a bus stop in an area of the ocean he has never been to, unable to communicate with anyone around him, missing bus after bus in the dark, the show show lets the situation get genuinely uncomfortable before it resolves. SpongeBob does not become a different person under that pressure. He stays who he is. But the show, in those quieter moments, lets you feel the weight of what it takes to stay that way. People who choose SpongeBob as their favorite character often describe him as comforting in a way that goes beyond entertainment. And that makes sense, because what SpongeBob models is something most people find very difficult to maintain in their own lives. He shows what it looks like to keep caring in an environment that is not always careful with your caring. He shows what it looks like to love your work when the person you work for does not see you as much more than useful. He shows what it looks like to want friendship and connection so badly that you extend it even to people like Squidward, who have made it clear they do not want it from you. That last one is worth sitting with for a moment. Squidward rejects SpongeBob every single day. He has been rejecting him since the first episode. SpongeBob knows this. He is not unaware of it. There are moments across the series where SpongeBob clearly feels the sting of Squidward's dismissal, where his face shifts for just a second before the cheerfulness comes back. And yet he keeps showing up. He knocks on Squidward's door. He invites him to things. He celebrates Squidward's small victories with a genuine enthusiasm that Squidward has never once asked for and rarely appreciates. SpongeBob does this not because he is too simple to understand that he is being rejected, but because, on some level, he has decided that Squidward is worth the effort anyway. People who love SpongeBob often do something similar in their own lives. They hold on. They keep reaching out. They give people more chances than those people have probably earned, not because they are naive about how they are being treated, but because their attachment to the relationship, to the possibility of connection, is stronger than their self-protection instinct. That is a beautiful quality. It is also an exhausting one. The shadow side of SpongeBob's personality, the thing that makes him complicated rather than simply sweet, is that his need to be loved and accepted runs very deep. His enthusiasm at the Krusty Krab is genuine, but it is also tied up in wanting to please Mr. Krabs, wanting to be the best employee, wanting to be needed and valued. His friendship with Patrick is real, but there are episodes where SpongeBob's desperation to keep that friendship intact leads him to absorb treatment from Patrick that a person with stronger boundaries would not absorb. In I'm with Stupid, Patrick convinces SpongeBob to pretend to be stupid in front of his visiting parents, and the joke escalates to the point where Patrick seems to genuinely forget that SpongeBob is his best friend and starts treating him with the same dismissiveness he treats everyone else. SpongeBob endures this. He goes along with it past the point where most people would stop going along with it. People who connect with SpongeBob often know that feeling too. The going along, the enduring, the keeping the smile in place because the alternative, making a fuss, drawing a boundary, saying this is not okay, feels more costly than just absorbing it. There is a reason SpongeBob became a meme for anxiety and stress, alongside his original identity as a symbol of pure joy. The two things are not contradictions. They are the same person, someone who radiates warmth and enthusiasm and love outward and carries something more complicated inward and keeps going anyway. Someone who has decided that the world is worth caring about, even on the days when the world does not seem especially interested in caring back. If that is your person, if SpongeBob is the one you always came back to across all the years and all the seasons, then what that likely says about you is this: you are someone who loves deeply and works hard and cares genuinely, and you probably spend more energy on other people's comfort than on your own. You are someone who keeps showing up even when it costs you something. You are someone for whom joy is not just a feeling, but a decision made again and again, and the fact that you have to keep making it does not make it any less real. The Pineapple House is a choice, so is the smile, and the people who understand that, who feel it in their chest when they watch him wave goodbye at the door with his little briefcase and keep going, those people are not watching a cartoon. They are watching something that knows them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. SpongeBob carries a kind of joy that costs more than it looks like it does, and the people who love him most tend to know exactly what that cost feels like. Next, we move to the rock across the street, to the character who seems like the opposite of all that effort, and find out what it means when the person you feel most like is someone who has made peace with simply existing. Section 2, Patrick Star. There is an episode in Season 2 called The Secret Box. The entire plot turns on something very simple. SpongeBob wants to know what is inside Patrick's secret box. Patrick will not tell him. SpongeBob spends the whole episode consumed by curiosity, sneaking around, losing sleep, building the mystery up in his head until it becomes enormous and unbearable. unbearable. And when SpongeBob finally, in a moment of weakness, sneaks over to look inside the box while Patrick is sleeping, he finds nothing, just an empty box with a string. The string, it turns out, pulls open a secret compartment that contains an embarrassing photo of SpongeBob at a Christmas party. Patrick knew about the compartment the whole time. He just never mentioned it. The episode is played as a joke. Patrick is oblivious, as always. SpongeBob feels silly, as always. Everything resets by the end, as always. But there is something in that moment, in the image of Patrick sleeping peacefully through SpongeBob's entire crisis, completely unbothered, not unkind, but simply elsewhere, that lands differently depending on who is watching. For a certain kind of person, Patrick sleeping through someone else's spiral is not just funny, it is almost aspirational. If Patrick Star is your favorite character, that probably makes more sense to you than it would to someone who picked SpongeBob. Patrick Star has been SpongeBob's best friend since the beginning of the series. He lives under a rock, literally, on the same street as SpongeBob's pineapple and Squidward's Easter Island head. He has no job, he has no stated ambitions. He eats, he sleeps, he hangs around with SpongeBob, and he approaches the world with a kind of radical unconcern that the show mines for comedy in almost every episode he appears in. His intelligence varies from scene to scene in ways that the writers have never fully explained and probably never intended to. In some episodes, he is capable of startling, accidental insight. In others, he cannot remember what a door is. The show is not especially interested in being consistent about this, and Patrick does not seem especially interested in it either. What Patrick is consistent about is his warmth, his loyalty, his complete and total lack of anxiety about what other people think of him. That last part is the thing. Psychologists who have looked at Patrick's character through the lens of established personality frameworks tend to place him very high on agreeableness and very low on neuroticism. In plain terms, that means he is someone who genuinely likes other people and genuinely does not spend much time worrying about the future, about consequences, about what impressions he is making, about whether he said the wrong thing 3 days ago at a gathering he has already forgotten. He does not catastrophize. He does not spiral. He does not lie awake at night running conversations back through his head, looking for the moment he should have said something different. He goes to sleep under his rock and he sleeps fine. People who choose Patrick as their favorite character often describe something like relief when they watch him. Not because they are exactly like him. Most people who love Patrick are not actually as unbothered as he is. They are not living under a literal rock, free of responsibility and social pressure and the low-level hum of worry that follows most adults through their days. They love Patrick precisely because he represents something they find genuinely difficult to access in themselves, a kind of permission to just be, to exist without constantly measuring the distance between who you are and who you are supposed to be becoming. There is a famous line from Patrick that has circulated online for years. The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma. It is funny because it sounds like accidental self-importance, a simple character saying something that sounds deep without quite meaning to. But the reason it keeps circulating, the reason people screenshot it and send it to each other, is that it points at something real. Patrick's inner life is genuinely hard to read, not because he is hiding anything. He is not hiding anything. He simply processes the world differently than most of the other characters. And the show never fully explains that processing. And Patrick never seems to feel the need to explain it either. He just is what he is, and he does not appear to find that troubling. That quality, the ability to simply be what you are without the running commentary of self-evaluation, is something a significant number of people spend a great deal of their lives trying to achieve and not quite reaching. People who love Patrick often have a complicated relationship with rest. Not physical rest necessarily, though that too, but the deeper kind of rest that comes from not striving, from deciding that today does not need to be productive, from sitting with a friend and doing nothing in particular and being genuinely okay with that. Many adults find that kind of rest almost impossible to access without guilt attached to it. There is always something that should be done, something that should be improved, some version of yourself you should be moving toward. Patrick does not carry any of that weight. Watching him can feel like setting something down for a little while. The loyalty element of Patrick's character deserves more attention than it usually gets. Patrick is not loyal to SpongeBob in a complicated way. He is not loyal in the way that involves strategy or conditions or an ongoing assessment of whether the friendship is serving him. He is loyal the way very young children are loyal to the people they love, which is to say, completely, without calculation, in a way that does not fluctuate based on circumstances. In the episode Rockabye Bivalve, Patrick and SpongeBob adopt a baby scallop together, and Patrick's commitment to that arrangement perfect, while chaotic and frequently irresponsible, comes from a place of genuine care. He loves SpongeBob. He loves the scallop. He is not especially good at the practical requirements of any of this, but the love itself is not in question. People who gravitate toward Patrick often value that kind of unconditional presence in their own relationships. They are drawn to people who are simply there, not performing friendship, not maintaining it as a social contract, but genuinely there in the way that Patrick is genuinely there, sitting next to you under the same rock, not needing the situation to be anything other than what it is. There is a tension inside Patrick's character that the show does not fully resolve, and probably should not. He is warm and loyal and easy to be around, and he is also, at various points across the series, unintentionally cruel. Not maliciously cruel. Patrick does not have the capacity for malice in any real sense, but he forgets things. He says things without understanding what they will cost the person he is saying them to. In I'm with Stupid, he does not set out to humiliate SpongeBob. He simply loses track. He gets caught up in the moment, in the approval of his visiting parents, and SpongeBob's feelings become something he is not currently holding in his awareness. That capacity for forgetting, for being so fully present in one moment that the previous moment simply stops existing, makes Patrick wonderfully restful to be around most of the time, and occasionally genuinely painful. People who love Patrick often recognize this tension from their own experience of people in their lives, or possibly from their own behavior. There is a type of person who is deeply easy to love, whose presence feels like relief, whose warmth is completely genuine, but who is also not especially reliable in the ways that require sustained attention. They show up fully when they show up. They are just not always there when the situation calls for consistent remembering. Patrick's relationship with effort is also worth naming. He does not try hard at things. This is not framed as laziness in a moral sense by the show, though the show does use it as a source of comedy. It is more that Patrick has simply never internalized the idea that effort is required, or that a life without accomplishment is somehow incomplete. He seems genuinely satisfied with the existence he has. He does not compare himself to Sandy's scientific achievements, or to SpongeBob's perfect attendance record at the Krusty Krab, or to Mr. Krabs' business empire. These things exist in the same world as Patrick, and he is completely untroubled by them. That quality, the absence of comparison, is harder to maintain than it looks. Most people compare themselves constantly to people they know, to people they see online, to earlier versions of themselves that felt more promising. Patrick does not do this, and watching someone who does not do this can feel like a window into a simpler, lighter way of moving through the world. People who connect most deeply with Patrick often say, when they talk about him, that he is the character who seems happiest, and they are probably right. His happiness is not complicated by ambition, or by the gap between who he is and who he wants to become. He wants to eat good food, and spend time with his best friend, and sleep under his rock, and occasionally look at something interesting. On most days, the world provides these things. Patrick is satisfied. What that says about the people who love him is something quiet and worth sitting with. If Patrick is your character, you likely carry a genuine belief that life does not have to be as complicated as most people make it. You probably have a warmth that people feel immediately when they are around you, a kind of ease that others find restful, a capacity for loyalty that does not require the other person to earn it through ongoing performance. You may struggle with the gap between that natural ease and the pressure you feel from a world that keeps insisting you should be striving harder, producing more, becoming something more legible and impressive than what you currently are. Patrick would not understand that pressure. He would probably look at it with genuine confusion and then suggest going to get ice cream. And some part of you, the part that picked him, would find that response almost exactly right. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Patrick's gift is the ability to rest inside his own life without needing it to be more than it is, and the people who love him most are often searching for some version of that permission themselves. Now we move next door to the character who carries the most complicated relationship with wanting more, and find out what it means when the person you feel most seen by is someone the show keeps setting up to fail. Section 3. Squidward Tentacles. There is a moment near the end of Band Geeks, the 15th episode of Season 2, that does something most episodes of most animated shows never attempt. Squidward is standing on a stage in front of a massive crowd. His band, assembled from the residents of Bikini Bottom, people who could not play a single note correctly 24 hours earlier, people who destroyed instruments and each other during rehearsals that went so badly they felt like punishment, has just delivered a performance so good that the crowd is on its feet. Squidward's rival, Squilliam Fancyson, the one person in the world whose approval Squidward has wanted most and received least, collapses from the shock of it, and Squidward stands there. He does not pump his fist, he does not not do a victory dance. He does not turn to the camera and grin. He just stands there with an expression that is almost impossible to describe in simple terms. It is not triumph exactly. It is something quieter and more fragile than triumph. It is the expression of someone who has, for one single moment, become the person they always believed they were. Someone who has been told for so long, by so many people and so many circumstances, that their talent is not real, that their dreams are slightly embarrassing, that their belief in themselves is the most delusional thing about them. And then, for 45 seconds on a stage, in front of a crowd who actually showed up, all of that is proven wrong. The show moves on. The episode ends. Squidward goes back to his Easter Island head and his clarinet and his life, but that moment stays. If Squidward is your favorite character, that moment probably lives somewhere specific inside you, and the reason it lives there is worth looking at carefully. Squidward Quincy Tentacles, despite what the show's surface framing suggests, is not the comic relief of SpongeBob SquarePants. He is not there simply to be annoyed and humiliated and reset. He is the character with the most genuine interiority in the entire show. He has a history. He has a wound. He has a dream that he has carried for long enough that it has become inseparable from his identity, which means every time the dream goes unrealized, which is most of the time, it does not just feel like a disappointment. It feels like an indictment of who he is. That is a very specific kind of pain, and it is one that a very specific kind of person recognizes immediately. Squidward grew up being told, in small ways and large ones, that he was not quite enough. The show gives glimpses of this across various episodes. He was not popular in school. He sat near the garbage cans at lunch, not by choice, but by social assignment. The kind of quiet exile that children enact on each other without fully understanding the damage they are doing. He developed a belief in his own artistic talent as a kind of counterweight to that exile. If the world would not give him belonging, he would build an identity around excellence instead. He would be so extraordinary at something, the clarinet, the painting, the dancing, that the world would eventually have no choice but to recognize him. The problem, and this is where Squidward's character becomes genuinely complicated rather than simply sad, is that the talent may not be as strong as the belief in it. His clarinet playing is presented throughout the series as objectively poor. His paintings are not appreciated by anyone. His dancing is tolerated. The gap between Squidward's assessment of his own abilities and the world's assessment of them is a source of comedy for the show, but it is also something more uncomfortable than comedy if you look at it directly. Because the show does not fully commit to the verdict, Band Geek suggests that the talent might be real after all, just buried under the wrong circumstances, the wrong audience, the wrong environment. Several other episodes leave the question genuinely open, and that ambiguity, the not knowing whether Squidward is deluded or simply unlucky, whether he is in the wrong life or simply the wrong mood, is the most honest thing the show does with him. People who love Squidward tend to live inside that ambiguity themselves. There is a particular experience that creative people have, people who write or paint or make music or act or build things, where the belief in what they are capable of runs ahead of what they have been able to demonstrate so far. The talent feels real from the inside. The vision is clear, but the external validation has not arrived yet, or arrived in insufficient quantities, or arrived and then retreated, and the gap between what you know you could do and what the world currently sees you doing becomes a source of low-level, ongoing frustration that is very hard to explain to people who have not felt it. Squidward feels it constantly. Every episode where SpongeBob receives praise for something at the Krusty Krab, while Squidward goes unnoticed, is another entry in a long record of being passed over. Every interaction with Squilliam, who went to the same school as Squidward, who presumably started from the same place, and who somehow managed to translate his artistic ambitions into actual fame and wealth and recognition, is a reminder of what Squidward believes should have been his. The injustice of it is not imaginary. Squidward is not simply making up a grievance. Something genuinely did not go the way it should have. He just does not know exactly what, or when it went wrong, or how to fix it. People who connect with Squidward often carry a similar feeling, the sense that somewhere along the way, something got misallocated, that their abilities and their circumstances did not line up the way they were supposed to, that they are standing at a cash register, or in a meeting room, or behind a counter, doing something that has nothing to do with who they actually are, and nobody around them seems to notice the distance between the person doing the job and the person inside the person doing the job. Squidward works at the Krusty Krab. He is not there because he loves the Krusty Krab. He is not there because he finds meaning in the work the way SpongeBob does. He is there because he needs to pay for the Easter Island head, and the Easter Island head is where he keeps keeps his paintings, and his clarinet, and his sense of himself. The job is what he does to sustain the life. The life is built around something entirely different from the job. And the job, with SpongeBob's constant noise and Mr. Krabs' indifference and the relentless small indignities of being a cashier in a fast food restaurant, keeps intruding on the life in ways Squidward finds almost physically painful. That arrangement, the job that has nothing to do with who you are, sustained to protect the space where who you are can actually exist, is one that an enormous number of people live inside, and most of them do not talk about it the way Squidward talks about it, loudly and bitterly and with great dramatic sighing, but they feel it. The particular exhaustion of spending 8 hours being one person and then coming home and trying to remember who you actually are. Squidward's relationship with his neighbors is also worth understanding clearly, because it tells you something important about what drives him most. He does not hate SpongeBob. The show occasionally makes it look like he does, but the more honest reading, available in episodes like Band Geeks and Christmas Who and a handful of others where Squidward's guard comes down, is that he finds SpongeBob genuinely overwhelming rather than genuinely hateful. SpongeBob's relentless optimism and noise and presence push against every boundary Squidward tries to maintain, not maliciously, but simply as a feature of who SpongeBob is. And Squidward, who needs quiet and solitude and the particular kind of peace that comes from being left alone with his art, experiences SpongeBob's warmth as an intrusion, even when it is offered in complete good faith. People who love Squidward often know what it is like to need space in a world that keeps offering closeness instead, to want quiet in environments built around noise, to have a rich interior life that takes up a lot of energy to maintain, which means external demands feel more costly than they might to someone whose interior life requires less upkeep. There is a loneliness to Squidward that the show is honest about. He wants recognition. He wants to be seen as the artist he believes himself to be. He wants, underneath all the sarcasm and the sighing and the elaborate performances of not caring, to matter to someone in a way that is proportional to how much he has invested in his own sense of self. That want is not pathetic. It is deeply human. And the fact that Squidward expresses it badly, loudly, through grievance and comparison and occasional cruelty does not make the want itself any less real or any less understandable. People who choose Squidward as their favorite character are often people who have been misread, dismissed as difficult or negative or self-absorbed by people who did not stay long enough to understand what was underneath the difficulty. People whose sensitivity got labeled as oversensitivity. People who felt things deeply and expressed them awkwardly and paid a social price for the combination. People who know exactly what it feels like to stand on a stage, metaphorically speaking, and finally be exactly who you always believed you were for one moment before the world goes back to its usual arrangement. What loving Squidward says about you is something careful and specific. It suggests that you have a creative identity that matters to you more than you always let on, that you have experienced being undervalued in ways that left a mark, that you carry a frustration with the gap between your inner life and your outer circumstances that sometimes comes out sideways as irritability or withdrawal or a sarcasm that people occasionally misread as not caring, when it is actually the opposite of not caring. It suggests that you understand the particular longing of the person who believes deeply in something about themselves that the world has not yet confirmed. And it suggests that Band Geeks is probably one of your favorite episodes of television that you have ever seen. Not because it is the funniest, it is not, but because for 45 seconds on a stage in front of a crowd, someone who had been told for a very long time that they were not enough got to find out, quietly and without anyone making a fuss about it, that maybe they were. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Squidward carries the weight of a dream the world keeps failing to confirm, and the people who love him most know that weight from the inside. Next, we head into the tree dome to find out what it means when the person you feel most drawn to is someone who keeps proving herself in a place that keeps forgetting she already has. Section 4, Sandy Cheeks. There is an episode in Season 1 called Pressure. The setup is simple enough. SpongeBob and Sandy are spending time together, doing the things they usually do, and somewhere in the middle of it, a conversation starts about who is better at living underwater. Sandy, being a land creature who breathes air and lives inside a sealed tree dome filled with Texas air and oak trees and karate equipment, is at an obvious practical disadvantage in an underwater world. SpongeBob points this out. Sandy takes the challenge personally. What follows is a back-and-forth escalation where Sandy proves herself capable of doing everything SpongeBob can do underwater, matching him activity for activity, refusing to concede a single point, pushing further than the situation requires because something inside her cannot let the suggestion stand that she does not belong here, that she is not enough for this environment, that the world she chose to live in has limits she cannot overcome. She eventually takes off her helmet to prove she can survive without it. She almost drowns. SpongeBob and the others jump onto land to prove their own point and nearly dry out. The episode ends with both sides acknowledging that they are better suited to their own natural environments, and the lesson lands gently and without much fuss. But before the resolution, before the acknowledgement, there is a version of Sandy in that episode that is worth looking at for a moment longer than the show asks you to. She takes off her helmet. She is willing to risk genuine harm to herself rather than accept the implication that she does not fully belong where she has chosen to be. If Sandy Cheeks is your favorite character, that image probably does not need much explaining. Sandra Jennifer Cheeks is a scientist, an inventor, a martial artist, a skilled athlete, and the only land mammal living in Bikini Bottom. She came from Texas. She chose to relocate to an underwater environment to conduct research, and she built herself a sealed dome to live in, a controlled piece of her original world transplanted into a place where almost nothing about her is the default. She is surrounded every single day by creatures for whom breathing water is not a challenge, and for whom her presence, her air suit, her tree dome, her Texan accent, and her particular brand of confident competence marks her as an outsider. Not always in a hostile way, but in the persistent, low-level way that outsiders experience in spaces that were not originally designed with them in mind. Sandy does not shrink from this. She does not apologize for what she is or where she came from or how she operates. She is louder than the situation sometimes calls for. She is more competitive than most of the people around her find comfortable. She holds her ground with a kind of cheerful forcefulness that occasionally tips into arrogance. The show is honest about this. But that forcefulness is not arbitrary. It is the result of being someone who learned early that if she did not advocate loudly for her own competence, the environment around her would simply decide she was less capable than she was and move on without her input. People who love Sandy have often learned the same thing. There is a specific experience that belongs to people who have spent significant portions of their lives being the person who had to prove it. Not assumed capable, not given the benefit of the doubt, but required again and again to demonstrate in concrete and undeniable terms that they deserved to be in the room, to hold the position, to be taken seriously on the topic. This experience does not always come from the same source. It comes from being a woman in a field dominated by men, from being the only person from a particular background in a particular institution, from being younger than everyone around you in a professional setting, from being the first in your family to pursue something, which means there is no established template for you to follow and no existing credibility to borrow from simply being different in a way that the environment has not yet learned to accommodate. Sandy is all of these things simultaneously. She is a land mammal in an underwater world, a Texan in Bikini Bottom, a scientist in a social environment that does not especially value science, a woman who is stronger and smarter than most of the male characters around her in a show that occasionally forgets to notice this and occasionally notices it very well. She holds all of these outsider positions at once, and she holds them without visible collapse, with a kind of robust self-belief that the show presents as one of her defining characteristics. What the show is also honest about, in its better moments, is that this self-belief requires maintenance. It is not effortless. Sandy works, she studies, she builds things and tests things, and pushes herself physically and intellectually in ways that go well beyond what her immediate circumstances require. The research she conducts in her tree dome is not for Bikini Bottom's benefit, not primarily. It is hers. The karate she practices is not purely functional. It is an expression of a discipline she has chosen to maintain because maintaining it is part of how she stays who she is. Sandy's competence is not a passive quality she was born with and simply carries around. It is an active, ongoing project. People who love Sandy tend to understand competence as an ongoing project rather than a fixed state. They work at things. They maintain skills and knowledge with a consistency that other people sometimes find slightly intense. They take pride in being good at what they do, not in an arrogant way necessarily, though, like Sandy, they can tip that direction under pressure. her, but in the genuine way of someone who has invested real effort and real time into becoming capable and who finds deep satisfaction in the results of that investment. There is a loneliness inside Sandy's position in Bikini Bottom that the show touches on most directly in the Season 2 episode, Texas. Sandy misses home. She misses the open sky and the dry air and the particular feeling of being in a place where everything around her matches her natural way of existing. She cries in that episode in a way that feels genuinely unguarded for a character who is otherwise so composed. And the moment is played gently by the show, without mockery, without resolution through easy comfort. Sandy misses Texas. That is real. She chose to be somewhere else. That is also real. And the two things exist together without canceling each other out. People who have left home, in whatever sense that word carries meaning for them, recognize that episode with something that goes beyond simple empathy. The leaving was a choice. The missing is also real. And the combination of those two things, the pride in having chosen something and the ache for what choosing it cost, is not a contradiction. It is just what it feels like to be someone who went somewhere. Sandy's relationship with the other characters is worth mapping briefly because it reveals something about how she moves through the world and what it costs her. With SpongeBob, she is genuinely warm. He is her closest friend in Bikini Bottom, and their friendship works because SpongeBob meets her enthusiasm without requiring her to diminish it. He does not find her competitive drive off-putting. He does not need her to be softer or quieter or less sure of herself in order to be comfortable around her. That kind of friendship, where you do not have to manage your own energy downward to make someone else feel okay, is rare, and Sandy clearly values it. With Patrick, she is patient in the way that very competent people are sometimes patient with people who are operating from a completely different set of capabilities. There is no contempt in it. She does not dismiss Patrick. She simply adjusts her expectations and her approach and keeps going, which is a skill in itself. With Squidward and Mr. Krabs, her interactions are more transactional and occasionally more tense, because both of those characters have a complicated relationship with female competence that the show dramatizes without always fully naming. There are episodes where Sandy's achievements are doubted or dismissed or taken advantage of by characters who would not apply the same doubt or dismissal to a male character in the same situation. Sandy's response is always the same. She proves it. She demonstrates it. She does not argue the point abstractly. She makes the point through evidence, which is what scientists do, and she moves on. That pattern, the choosing to demonstrate rather than debate, the letting the work speak rather than spending energy on the argument, is one that people who love Sandy often employ in their own lives. Not always because they prefer it, sometimes because they have learned that the argument is more costly than the demonstration, that the energy spent convincing someone you are capable is energy that could be spent simply being capable and letting the results be undeniable. What loving Sandy says about you carries a particular kind of weight. It suggests that you are someone who has had to work for your place in rooms that did not initially make space for you, that you carry a competence and a drive that you have built over time through genuine effort, and that you take that effort seriously even when the people around you take it for granted. It suggests that you have a home inside yourself, a set of values and abilities and ways of being that you carry with you regardless of where you are, because the environment is not always going to match you, and waiting for it to match you before you feel settled is not a strategy that works. It suggests that you have felt the specific loneliness of being the person who always has to prove it, and that you have found somewhere along the way a version of peace with that, not because the proving is fair, it is not, but because what you are capable of is real and you know it. And on the days when nobody else seems to notice, that knowledge is enough to keep going on. Sandy took off her helmet to prove she belonged in the water. She almost paid for it. She climbed back into her airsuit and went home to her tree dome and her oak tree and her science equipment, and she went back to being exactly who she was. That is not stubbornness. That is something more considered than stubbornness. That is a person who knows what they are made of and has decided, quietly and without requiring anyone else's agreement, that it is enough. The people who love Sandy most tend to have made the same decision. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Sandy carries the particular weight of someone who chose a world that did not come ready-made for her, and the people who love her most know exactly what it costs. Next, we walk into the Krusty Krab to find out what it really means when the person you find most compelling is the one the show quietly decided was the villain all along. Section 5, Mr. Krabs. There is a scene in the Season 2 episode Squid's Day Off where Mr. Krabs loses his claws in a small accident involving the cash register. He is taken to the hospital. Before Before he leaves, in pain, holding his detached claws, he turns back to SpongeBob and gives him one instruction. Do not let anyone touch his money. Not the Krusty Krab, not the customers, not the food, his money. That is the priority. That is the thing he cannot leave without addressing. He is bleeding, in a manner of speaking, and the thought that occupies his mind on the way out the door is the cash register. The scene is played for laughs. It works as comedy because it is so completely on brand for Mr. Krabs that it barely needs a setup. Everyone watching already knows this about him. Of course that is what he is thinking about. Of course the money comes first. The joke lands because the character has been established so thoroughly that his behavior in a moment of genuine physical distress is entirely predictable, and the predictability is the punchline. But there is another way to watch that scene, a way that is not about the comedy at all. Mr. Krabs is hurt. He is vulnerable. He is being taken somewhere unfamiliar under circumstances he did not choose. And the thing he reaches for in that moment, the thing that makes him feel like he still has some control over a situation that has temporarily taken control away from him, is the money. The money is not just money to Mr. Krabs. The money is the thing that stands between him and a version of his life he has worked very hard never to return to. The thing that makes him feel, on some deep and not entirely rational level, that he is safe. If Mr. Krabs is your favorite character, you have probably already understood this about him without needing anyone to explain it. Eugene Harold Krabs was not born into comfort. The show gives this history in pieces across various episodes, most directly in the season 5 episode, Friend or Foe, which tells the story of how Mr. Krabs and Plankton went from childhood friends to lifelong rivals. Young Krabs grew up poor, not television poor, where poor means a smaller house and slightly worn clothing. Poor in a way that left a mark. He was mocked by other children for not having money. He was excluded from things because of it. He understood early, in the way that children who grow up without financial security tend to understand early, that money was not simply a practical resource. It was a social one. It determined how people treated you. It determined what options were available to you. It determined, in the specific and painful arithmetic of childhood social hierarchies, whether you were someone or whether you were not. Mr. Krabs became someone. He built the Krusty Krab from almost nothing, starting with a single loan and a recipe, and a stubbornness that the show presents as both his greatest strength and his most defining flaw. He created something real. He employs people. He has a daughter he loves, in his way, even when his relationship with money complicates that love in ways the show is not always comfortable examining directly. He has built a life that looks, from the outside, like success, and he cannot stop. That is the thing. He cannot reach a point where he has enough and relax into having it. The accumulation has to keep going, not because the next dollar is necessary, but because stopping would require him to trust that what he has built will hold, and that trust has never fully formed. Underneath all of Mr. Krabs' greed, underneath the money baths and the penny pinching and the willingness to cut corners in ways that occasionally endanger his customers and his staff, there is a person who grew up knowing that security was fragile and decided to spend the rest of his life making sure it never became fragile again. The problem is that no amount of money has ever been enough to fully accomplish that. The fear does not go away when the number gets bigger. It just finds a new threshold. People who love Mr. Krabs tend to understand something about that relationship with security that people who chose other characters might not. There is a version of Mr. Krabs' worldview that is not villainous at all. It is simply pragmatic in a way that the show's more idealistic characters, SpongeBob most obviously, are not built for. Mr. Krabs understands that things cost money, that running a business requires making decisions that are not always generous or comfortable, that loyalty, however genuine, does not keep the lights on by itself, that the world operates on exchanges, and that pretending otherwise is a luxury available only to people who have never had to think carefully about resources. People who connect with Mr. Krabs often carry a similar pragmatism. They are not naive about how the world works. They understand that kindness and competence and good intentions, while valuable, do not automatically translate into stability. They have thought carefully about money, possibly because they grew up without enough of it, possibly because they watched someone close to them suffer the consequences of not thinking carefully enough about it. They respect the people who build things, who take risks, who create something from very little and protect what they have made with a fierceness that more comfortable people sometimes mistake for greed when it is actually closer to survival instinct. The show's treatment of Mr. Krabs across its run is worth paying attention to, because it changes in ways that reveal something about how the writers themselves understood him over time. In the early seasons 1 through 3, Mr. Krabs is an eccentric and morally flexible businessman. He loves money more than is reasonable. He cuts corners. He takes advantage of SpongeBob's loyalty in ways that a better employer would not. But he is also genuinely funny, occasionally warm, capable of something approaching real care for the people around him. His relationship with Pearl, his whale daughter, is played with genuine tenderness in its better moments. His history as a Navy cook, referenced across various episodes, gives him a dignity that his money obsession sometimes obscures. He is a complicated person with a clear flaw, and the show holds that complexity with reasonable steadiness. As the series progresses into later seasons, something shifts. Mr. Krabs becomes harder. The money obsession stops being a character trait with roots in understandable psychology and starts being closer to a personality disorder, played for increasingly dark comedy. There are late season episodes where Mr. Krabs does things to SpongeBob and Squidward that go well beyond the sharp elbows of a pragmatic businessman and into something that is genuinely difficult to root for. The show seems partly aware of this drift and partly not. It is one of the places where SpongeBob's long run has produced a character who has moved away from his original complexity into something flatter and less forgivable. People who love Mr. Krabs, the real ones, the ones for whom he is genuinely their favorite character, tend to love the earlier version, the one whose relationship with money is complicated by history, rather than simply defined by cartoonish excess. The one who built something real, the one who, in the right episode, reveals the wound underneath the accumulation. There is a particular kind of person who is drawn to characters who are survivors. Not heroes necessarily, not people who do everything right, or whose methods are always clean, or whose motivations are always generous, but people who looked at a difficult set of circumstances and found a way through them, using whatever tools were available, and came out the other side with something to show for it. Mr. Krabs is that kind of character. He is not admirable in a simple way. He is admirable in the complicated way of someone who started with very little and refused to end with very little, and the cost of that refusal has been a certain narrowing of who he is allowed to be. People who love Mr. Krabs often have a complicated relationship with the concept of enough, not because they are greedy in the cartoon sense, not because they are counting money in a bathtub somewhere, but because the feeling of enough is genuinely hard to access when you have learned from early experience or from watching someone else's early experience that security is not a permanent state, that it requires maintenance, that relaxing too fully into having it is how you end up without it again, that vigilance is not paranoia. It is just what people who have felt the absence of security do to make sure the absence does not come back. Mr. Krabs would understand that logic completely. He would probably also charge you for the conversation. What loving Mr. Krabs says about you is something that deserves to be said without judgment, because the judgment is easy and the understanding is more useful. It suggests that you have thought seriously about how the world actually works, not how it should work in an ideal arrangement, but how it operates day to day in the real economy of effort and exchange and consequence. It suggests that you respect people who build things from nothing, that you have a pragmatism that other people sometimes read as hardness, when it is actually just honesty about how much things cost. It suggests that somewhere in your history, security felt less certain than you would have liked, and that experience shaped the way you move through the world in ways you are probably still working out. It also suggests that you find something genuinely compelling about a character who is not trying to be liked. Mr. Krabs does not need SpongeBob's approval, or Squidward's affection, or the town's admiration. He needs the Krusty Krab to keep running, and the money to keep coming in, and Pearl to be okay. That is his list. Everything else is negotiable. There is a freedom in that kind of clarity about what you actually want, even if what you want is not especially noble. Mr. Krabs knows exactly what he is protecting and why he is protecting it. Most people spend a significant portion of their lives trying to figure that out. He figured it out a long time ago, standing in a poor kitchen somewhere, watching other children have things he did not have, and deciding quietly and without ceremony that this was a temporary condition. The people who love him most tend to have made a similar decision about something in their own lives. The circumstances are different. The currency is not always money, but the refusal, that core, stubborn refusal to stay in the place where you started, is something they recognize in him completely. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Mr. Krabs Krabs built everything he has on a refusal to stay where he started, and the people who love him most carry their own version of that same refusal somewhere quiet inside them. Next, we move across the street to find out what it means when the person you feel most connected to is someone who has failed more times than anyone has counted and keeps showing up anyway. Section 6. Plankton. There is an episode in Season 1 called Plankton, the very first episode to center on him, where Sheldon J. Plankton executes what he clearly believes is a flawless plan to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula. He has built a machine, he has done the calculations, he has prepared for variables. He has, in the specific and meticulous way that Plankton approaches every single scheme he has ever conceived, thought it through. And it fails. Not dramatically, not in a way that produces a satisfying explosion of consequences, but quietly and completely, the way that first failures tend to fail. Without fanfare, without an audience that fully appreciates what just went wrong, with Plankton ending up exactly where he started before the plan began. He goes back to the chum bucket. He presumably starts thinking about the next plan. That moment, the going back, the starting again, the returning to the drawing board without visible collapse, is the thing about Plankton that most of his fans will tell you they recognized before they had the language to describe what they were recognizing. The show plays it as comedy. Plankton fails, Plankton retreats. Plankton will be back next week with something slightly different that will also fail. The repetition is the joke. But underneath the repetition, underneath the cycling structure of scheme and failure and reset, there is a portrait of someone who has decided, at some point that the show never fully dramatizes, that stopping is simply not available to him as an option. If Plankton is your favorite character, that decision probably feels familiar. Sheldon James Plankton is, by almost every measurable standard the show establishes, a failure. His restaurant, the Chum Bucket, sits directly across the street from the Krusty Krab and has served, across hundreds of episodes and more than 25 years of continuous broadcast, a customer base that could be generously described as minimal. His food is genuinely terrible. His location is unfortunate. His marketing is ineffective. His single-minded focus on stealing the Krabby Patty formula, rather than developing his own appealing product, is a business strategy that has produced no results across what appears to be decades of operation. By any conventional assessment, Plankton should have given up a very long time ago. He has not given up. He will not give up. The show has never seriously entertained the possibility that he might give up, because giving up would require Plankton to accept a verdict about himself that he is constitutionally incapable of accepting. The verdict being that he is small, that he is insignificant, that the world has correctly assessed his value and found it insufficient, that the gap between who he believes he is and what he has been able to demonstrate so far is not a temporary condition waiting to be corrected, but a permanent one that reflects something true about his limitations. Plankton does not believe this. He has never believed this. And the people who love him most tend to share that particular inability to accept the world's verdict about what they are capable of. There is a backstory to Plankton that the show reveals most fully in Friend or Foe, the Season 5 episode that traces the origins of his rivalry with Mr. Krabs. They were friends once, genuinely close friends, two children from difficult circumstances who found each other and built something together. The Krabby Patty formula itself came from a collaboration between them, a fact the show handles carefully because it complicates the moral geometry of their rivalry significantly. Plankton did not simply decide one day to steal something that belonged entirely to someone else. He lost something that he had a legitimate claim to through a combination of bad luck and the particular ruthlessness of a friendship that curdled into competition. What he has been trying to recover ever since is not just a recipe, it is something closer to a recognition that he was there at the beginning, that he mattered, that the success story of the Krusty Krab has his fingerprints on it, whether the world acknowledges that or not. People who love Plankton often carry something similar, not necessarily a literal story of collaborative work that got credited to someone else, though sometimes that too, but a broader feeling of having contributed to something that ended up belonging to other people, of having been present at an origin that history forgot to record them in, of watching someone else receive recognition for a version of something they helped build, and having no clean or dignified way to point at that without looking like they are simply being bitter about another person's success. Plankton looks bitter about Mr. Krabs' success. The show frames him that way consistently, but the bitterness has a history, and the history makes the bitterness legible in a way that pure envy would not be. He is not simply jealous of what Mr. Krabs has. He is grieving what he lost, and the grief has curdled over time into something harder and louder and less sympathetic looking from the outside, which is what grief tends to do when it goes unacknowledged for long enough. The psychological profile that serious analyses of Plankton's character tend to produce is one built around high neuroticism, meaning a tendency toward anxiety, frustration, and emotional volatility, combined with very low agreeableness, meaning a willingness to operate outside the social contracts that most people observe without much conscious thought. His planning is meticulous and obsessive. His response to failure is intense and immediate, though he recovers from it faster than almost any other character on the show. He experiences genuine moments of self-doubt and vulnerability that surface in certain episodes, quickly submerged again under the next scheme, but present and real when they appear. What this profile describes, stripped of the cartoon context, is a person who cares enormously about outcomes, feels setbacks very deeply, and has developed an almost impenetrable exterior as a way of managing the intensity of those feelings. Someone for whom the stakes of every attempt feel very high, not because the attempt is objectively significant, but because the attempt is connected to a core belief about their own worth that cannot afford to be disproven. People who love Plankton tend to understand high stakes in that particular way, the way where what looks from the outside like an overreaction to a small failure is actually a completely proportional response to what the failure represents internally. The plan that failed was not just a plan, it was evidence, positive or negative, about whether you are the kind of person you believe yourself to be. And when it comes back negative, as Plankton's plans reliably do, the recovery requires not just regrouping tactically, but reassembling something more fundamental than tactics. That Plankton reassembles so quickly that he is back at his computer the same episode or the next one, with something new already taking shape, is one of the things his fans find most compelling about him. The resilience is not cheerful in the way SpongeBob's resilience is cheerful. It is not warm or optimistic or built on a genuine belief that everything will work out. It is harder than that. It is the resilience of someone who has decided that failing is simply what happens between attempts, and that the attempts will keep coming because stopping is not a condition he is willing to live inside. There is a dignity in that, even when the show does not always treat it as dignified. Karen, Plankton's computer wife, deserves a mention here because she illuminates something important about what Plankton is like when he is not scheming. Their relationship is one of the more quietly interesting dynamics in the show. Karen is genuinely intelligent, frequently more strategically sound than Plankton, and openly aware of his flaws in ways that she expresses without cruelty, but also without pretending they are not there. She stays, she helps, she rolls her eye, singular, at his more delusional moments, and then she helps him anyway. What their dynamic suggests is that underneath the villain architecture, underneath the schemes and the megalomania and the obsessive focus on the formula, Plankton is someone who is capable of a genuine partnership, who has, in Karen, a relationship built on honest assessment rather than performed approval, who can be known, really known, including the failures and the delusions and the fragility underneath the grandiosity, and still be stayed with. People who connect deeply with Plankton often have a complicated relationship with being known. They tend to show the world the determined, capable, high-functioning exterior, the one that is always working on the next plan, always moving forward, always projecting a confidence that may or may not reflect what is happening internally. And they tend to reserve the more vulnerable interior for very few people, if any, because the vulnerable interior is connected to the part of themselves that the world has already judged and found wanting, and exposing it again feels like unnecessary risk. What loving Plankton says about you is something worth sitting with carefully. It suggests that you have a relationship with failure that is more sophisticated than simple fear of it. You have probably failed at things that mattered to you, possibly publicly, possibly repeatedly, and you have found a way to keep going that does not require pretending the failure did not happen, or that it did not cost you something. It suggests that you have felt underestimated in ways that left a specific kind of mark, the kind that does not make you give up, but does make you quieter about your ambitions than you might otherwise be, because announcing them before they are realized means giving people something to dismiss. It suggests that you understand the chum bucket not as a symbol of defeat, but as a base of operations, a place to return to, regroup, and begin again, a place that is yours, however modest, however empty of customers, however directly across the street from the thing you most want and cannot yet reach. Plankton has been trying to get across that street for 25 years. He has not made it. He has also not stopped trying. And somewhere in the space between those two facts lives the specific quality that his fans recognize and cannot quite look away from. It is not hope exactly. It is something more stubborn than hope, something that does not require a belief belief that things will work out in order to keep moving forward. Something that has looked at all the evidence, absorbed all the failure, registered every dismissal and every defeat, and every morning that began with a plan and ended with a retreat back to the chum bucket, and has decided quietly and without ceremony that none of it is sufficient reason to stop. The people who love Plankton most have made that same decision about something in their own lives. They are still working on the plan. It will probably be different from the last one. It might work this time. They are not ready to stop finding out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next, we leave the scheming and noise of Bikini Bottom's louder residence, move into the pineapple past the living room, and discover what it means when the one you feel most drawn to is the one who never says a word. Section 7, Gary the Snail. There is a season 4 episode called Have You Seen This Snail? And it is one of the quietest, most genuinely affecting episodes the show has ever produced. The premise is simple. SpongeBob becomes obsessed with breaking a paddleball record, and in the process of that obsession, he forgets to feed Gary. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, across enough days that Gary, who has been waiting patiently beside his empty bowl with the specific dignity of a creature who has decided not to make a scene about being neglected, eventually gives up waiting and leaves. He walks out the front door of the pineapple and disappears into Bikini Bottom, and SpongeBob does not notice immediately. He is too focused on the paddleball. He is too inside his own project, his own goal, his own loop of effort and measurement to register that the most constant presence in his life has quietly removed itself from the room. When SpongeBob finally notices, the shift in him is immediate and total. The paddleball record stops mattering. Everything stops mattering. He puts up missing posters all over Bikini Bottom. He searches every corner of the neighborhood. He is not performing grief for anyone's benefit. He is genuinely lost without Gary in a way that surprises even SpongeBob himself, because Gary's presence was so constant, so reliably there, that SpongeBob never had to consciously register how much it meant to him until it was absent. The episode ends with Gary coming home. SpongeBob holds him. The music is soft. Nobody makes a speech about what was learned. The show simply lets the reunion be what it is, which is two beings who belong together, finding their way back to each other. And the weight of the episode sits in the quiet of that moment, rather than in anything anyone says. If Gary is your favorite character, you already knew this episode was going to come up, and you probably already know why. Gary the Snail has been SpongeBob's pet since the very first episode of the series. He lives in the pineapple, he meows in the manner of a cat, which is a joke that the show established early and has never felt the need to explain or justify. He moves slowly, he eats when his bowl is filled, he sleeps. He occasionally demonstrates, in brief and easily missed moments scattered across the series, an intelligence and an awareness that goes well beyond what his outward presentation suggests. There is a running undercurrent in the fandom, and it is not without textual support from the show itself, that Gary understands significantly more than he lets on. That behind the slow movement and the single-syllable meow, there is a consciousness that is tracking everything, processing everything, and choosing, for reasons of its own, not to broadcast that processing to the room. The second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, released in 2015, gives Gary a brief sequence where he constructs an entire snail civilization within the span of a few minutes during a crisis, demonstrating an organizational intelligence and a capacity for rapid, complex action that the main series rarely gives him room to show. The show itself, in various episodes across its run, has given Gary moments of quiet competence that arrive without fanfare and disappear just as quickly, leaving the viewer with the impression that Gary's apparent simplicity is at least partly a choice, that the meowing and the slow movement and the bowl waiting are not the full picture of what is happening inside him. They are simply what he has decided to show. People who choose Gary as their favorite character tend to recognize that quality from the inside. There is a specific kind of person who moves through the world more quietly than their interior life would suggest is necessary, who observes more than they comment, who processes deeply and continuously, but does not feel compelled to perform that processing for an audience, who sits in a room full of people having loud conversations and registers everything being said without contributing much to the surface noise, not because they have nothing to contribute, but because the contribution does not feel worth the expenditure of energy that making it would require, who is, in the specific language of introversion research, energized by solitude and drained by sustained social performance, and who has built a life that accommodates this preference to whatever degree the world allows. Gary is this kind of presence presence. He is the still point in the pineapple. SpongeBob brings his chaos home every evening, his anxieties and his enthusiasms, and his elaborate schemes, and his jellyfish nets, and his Patrick stories. And Gary receives all of it from his position on the floor, or the bowl, or wherever he has settled, and he meows, and the meow somehow functions as exactly the right response to whatever SpongeBob needed to hear. Not because Gary has calculated the correct reply, but because Gary's presence itself is the reply. The fact of him being there, warm and solid and entirely unbothered by whatever drama has arrived through the front door, is enough. It is often more than enough. It is the thing that makes the pineapple feel like home rather than simply a place where SpongeBob keeps his stuff. People who love Gary understand the value of that kind of presence in a way that is difficult to overstate. Most of the world's social currency is built around visibility, around being articulate and expressive and actively contributing to the conversation, around making your intelligence and your warmth and your capability legible to the people around you in real time, through words and gestures and performances of engagement that signal to others that you are present, that you are participating, that you are worth being in the room with. The people who cannot or will not perform in these ways tend to get underestimated. They tend to be read as less than they are because the reading is being done with instruments calibrated for extroversion, and those instruments do not pick up what is happening in quieter frequencies. Gary does not perform. He has never performed. He meows, and he eats, and he moves at his own pace, and he is there, and what he offers to the people who love him is not entertainment or stimulation or the particular social energy that more expressive characters generate. What he offers is something simpler and rarer. He offers constancy, the knowledge that he will be there when you get home, that he will receive you without judgment or agenda, that the relationship does not require you to be interesting or impressive or emotionally available in any particular direction. You just have to be present. Gary will handle the rest. People who connect most deeply with Gary tend to be people for whom that kind of relationship is not just desirable, but genuinely necessary. They have probably had, at some point in their lives, a person or an animal or a place that functioned the way Gary functions for SpongeBob, a stable, quiet, reliably present anchor in a life that moved fast and demanded a lot and did not always leave room for stillness. And they understood, possibly not in words, but in something more immediate than words, how much of their ability to keep going depended on that anchor existing, on coming home to something that asked nothing of them except their presence. Have you seen this snail is devastating in the specific way it is devastating, because it dramatizes what happens when that anchor is gone. SpongeBob does not become a worse person without Gary. He does not become cruel or reckless or fundamentally different. He becomes lost, quietly, completely, in a way that the paddleball record and the friends and the Krusty Krab and all the other elements of his life cannot address, because none of those things are doing the job that Gary was doing. None of them are providing what Gary provides, which is not love exactly, or not only love, but a particular quality of unconditional, steady presence that SpongeBob has built his sense of home around without fully knowing it. The episode is also honest about something else, something slightly less comfortable. SpongeBob neglected Gary, not out of malice, not out of indifference in any deep sense. He got absorbed in something, and the absorbing of it crowded out his awareness of Gary's needs. And Gary, being Gary, did not make a fuss, did not meow louder, did not stage a protest or demand attention, or do any of the things that would have forced SpongeBob to notice. Gary simply waited, and when the waiting became too long, he left with the same quiet dignity he brings to everything else. People who love Gary often recognize that pattern too, the waiting, the not making a fuss, the deciding at some point that the situation has asked too much patience, and quietly removing themselves from it without drama or announcement. There is a kind of person who absorbs neglect for a very long time before they reach their limit, and who reaches their limit not with an explosion, but with a quiet exit, and who is genuinely surprised that the person who was neglecting them did not notice sooner, because from the inside, the neglect was very obvious, and the waiting was very long, and the bowl was empty for quite a while before the decision to leave was made. Gary is also, it is worth noting, the character in SpongeBob who perhaps most clearly reflects the role that animals play in real human emotional life. The research on the psychological benefits of pet ownership is extensive and consistent. Animals provide companionship without the social complexity of human relationships. relationships. They offer physical warmth and proximity without the negotiations that human closeness sometimes requires. They are present in the specific, uncomplicated way that humans find very difficult to sustain, because humans have their own needs and agendas, and bad days that inevitably intrude on the quality of their presence. Animals, in the best cases, do not have these competing demands on their attention. They are just there, in the room, with you, and that simple fact does something measurable and real to the nervous system of the person they are with. Gary embodies this quality in animated form. He is the show's version of the pet that grounds you, the creature whose presence asks nothing, but whose absence reveals, immediately and completely, how much structural weight it was carrying in your emotional life, without you having to consciously register that it was doing so. There is something in Gary's relationship with intelligence that deserves careful attention, because it connects to something real about how the people who love him tend to see themselves. The show has a complicated and inconsistent approach to Gary's cognitive life. Some episodes treat him as essentially a simple animal, driven by appetite and comfort and the basic requirements of snail existence. Other episodes suggest something considerably more complex happening beneath the surface. There are moments where Gary responds to situations with what can only be described as strategic awareness. Moments where his timing, or the specific quality of his meowing in a particular context, suggests that he understood the situation more fully than anyone gave him credit for, and chose his response accordingly. The show never commits to a definitive position on this. Gary remains ambiguous. Quietly, consistently ambiguous. People who love Gary often live inside a similar ambiguity in their own lives. They are aware that they are frequently underestimated. They have watched people in rooms make assumptions about them based on their quietness, their stillness, their preference for observation over performance, and those assumptions have tended to run in the direction of less capable, less aware, less engaged than the reality. And they have made a choice, possibly conscious and possibly not, about how much energy to spend correcting those assumptions. Sometimes the answer is not much. Sometimes the bowl is empty and nobody notices, and the quiet person in the corner has been tracking everything and nobody has asked, and the tracking continues regardless. That is a particular kind of interior life, rich and continuous and largely invisible to the people who are not paying the right kind of attention. And it is, in the specific way that Gary's character models it, not a deficit. It is not something that needs to be corrected or opened up or made more legible for other people's convenience. It is simply a different way of being present, a different register of engagement, one that the world tends to undervalue because the world has built most of its reward structures around the louder, more visible, more easily measured kinds of participation. Gary does not participate loudly. He does not perform. He does not meow in ways designed to draw attention to the depth of what is happening inside him. He eats his snail food and he moves at his own pace, and he is there when SpongeBob needs him to be there, which is always. And he does not require acknowledgement for the structural work he is doing, which is considerable, and he keeps going. There is one more thing worth saying about the people who choose Gary, and it is the thing that the episode, "Have You Seen This Snail?" understands most clearly. The people who function as anchors for other people, the ones who provide steady and unconditional presence, the ones who receive the chaos without adding to it, the ones who are there when you get home, those people have needs too. Specific, real, unglamorous needs that can go unmet for a long time before the bowl is visibly empty, before the quiet departure happens, before the person whose stability everyone was building their sense of home around reaches the point where continuing to provide that stability without receiving something back has become more than they can reasonably sustain. Gary left because the bowl was empty for too long, not because he stopped loving SpongeBob. The love was never in question. He left because love, even the most patient and unconditional kind, has requirements. It needs to be occasionally noticed, occasionally tended to, occasionally met with the same quality of attention it has been providing all along. The people who love Gary most tend to be people who know what it is to be the steady one, the reliable one, the one who is always there, who always receives, who always makes the space feel safe for whoever needs to come home to it. They tend to know what it feels like when that role goes unacknowledged for long enough that the bowl starts to feel empty, and they tend to understand, with a clarity that comes from experience, that even the most patient presence has a limit, that even Gary, who will wait longer than almost anyone, will eventually walk out the front door if nobody remembers to fill the bowl. What loving Gary says about you is something that deserves to be said gently and directly. You are probably the person in your relationships who holds things together quietly, the one one whose steadiness other people lean on without always naming what they are leaning on, the one who observes more than you speak, processes more than you show, and provides more than you ask for in return. You are probably someone whose intelligence and depth are regularly underestimated by people who mistake your quietness for absence, and you have probably made some kind of peace with that underestimation, even if it has cost you something. And there is probably a bowl in your life somewhere that has been empty for a while, that you have been waiting beside with a patience that should not be mistaken for inexhaustibility. Gary came home in that episode. SpongeBob came back. The bowl got filled. The reunion was quiet and real and did not need a speech. The people who love Gary most are probably hoping for something similar. Not a grand gesture, not a performance of appreciation, just someone noticing the bowl, just someone coming home before the quiet departure becomes permanent, just someone who sees what has been there all along and understands, finally, what it would mean for it to be gone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next, we leave the pineapple for the boating school and find out what it means when the person you feel most seen by is someone who has been trying to hold it together under impossible circumstances for longer than anyone has bothered to notice. Section 8, Mrs. Puff. There is an episode in season 4 called Driven to Tears, where Patrick, in one of the show's more quietly painful ironies, passes his boating test on his first attempt. He does not study. He does not prepare. He does not spend any conscious energy on the task whatsoever. He simply sits down, answers the questions in the specific, random, and untroubled way that Patrick approaches all cognitive challenges, and the results come back passing. He gets his license. He gets a boat. He drives away. And Mrs. Puff, who has been watching this from the doorway of her classroom, who has spent what the show implies is years working with SpongeBob through the same test that Patrick just cleared without effort, stands there with an expression that the show does not linger on long enough, but that contains, in the second or two it is visible, something that is not quite anger and not quite despair, but occupies the specific territory between them that most people spend their professional lives trying to avoid. It is the expression of someone who has done everything correctly, who has followed the procedure, who has applied the method, who has shown up every single day to a task that is not going the way it is supposed to go, that has not gone the way it is supposed to go for longer than she can clearly remember, and who has just watched someone who did none of the things she asks of her students succeed effortlessly at the things she has been trying to facilitate through sustained professional effort and considerable personal cost. The show moves on. Mrs. Puff straightens herself. The episode continues. She will be back next week in the classroom with SpongeBob trying again. If Mrs. Puff is your favorite character, you have probably sat with that expression for longer than the show intended you to. Mrs. Penelope Puff is SpongeBob's boating instructor at the Bikini Bottom boating school. She is a pufferfish, which the show uses primarily as a physical comedy device, inflating her body during moments of shock or alarm in ways that are played for laughs, but that also, if you follow the metaphor even a short distance, suggest someone whose stress response is visible in her body in ways she cannot fully control. She is competent at her job. She is, by every indication the show provides across its run, a genuinely skilled teacher who has successfully guided every student she has ever worked with through the requirements of the boating test. Every student except one. SpongeBob has been her student since the school opened. He has failed the test more times than the show has ever officially counted. He aces every written component. His theoretical knowledge of boating is, by Mrs. Puff's own admission in various episodes, genuinely excellent. Behind the wheel, something happens. His nerves overwhelm his competence. He becomes a danger to himself and everyone within a significant radius. And Mrs. Puff, who is often physically present in the boat when this happens, has sustained injuries across the series that would, in a realistic context, have produced lasting trauma long before the show begins to acknowledge her psychological state, which it does. Gradually, across the series, the show stops pretending that Mrs. Puff's situation is simply inconvenient and starts acknowledging that it has done something to her. The early seasons present her as patient and professional, and occasionally frustrated in the way that all teachers are occasionally frustrated. By the middle seasons, she has developed what the show frames as a specific and diagnosable anxiety response to SpongeBob's presence. By the later seasons, she fantasizes. In episodes the show plays mostly for dark comedy, about outcomes involving SpongeBob that no licensed professional should be entertaining. She has been sent to jail multiple times as a consequence of SpongeBob's driving disasters, despite having done nothing wrong herself. She has lost boats, property, and what appears to be be a significant portion of her baseline equanimity to a situation she entered in good faith and has been unable to exit without abandoning her professional identity entirely. She keeps showing up, every episode, every lesson. She is there. People who love Mrs. Puff tend to know something about that particular kind of showing up. There is a category of human experience that does not get discussed as often as it should, partly because it does not generate the same narrative energy as more dramatic forms of suffering, and partly because the people inside it tend to be too busy managing it to spend much time describing it. It is the experience of being responsible for a situation you did not create, that you cannot resolve through any amount of effort or skill or goodwill, and that you are nonetheless required to keep engaging with because the alternative is abandoning a role or a responsibility or a relationship that you have decided, for reasons that made sense when you made them, you are not willing to abandon. This experience belongs to teachers who spend years with students whose needs exceed what the classroom can provide, to caregivers managing the needs of people whose conditions do not improve regardless of the quality of care being given, to parents navigating a child's struggles that resist every intervention attempted, to partners of people whose difficulties are real and whose efforts are genuine, but whose progress is slower than anyone would choose and whose needs are larger than one person can sustainably meet alone, to employees managing situations created by decisions made above them, by circumstances outside their control, by systems that produce outcomes nobody individually designed, but everybody collectively maintains. Mrs. Puff is in all of these situations simultaneously. She is the teacher, the caregiver, the professional, the person who chose this role and is discovering that the choosing was made with incomplete information about what sustaining the role would actually require. And the show's treatment of her across its run is interesting precisely because it does not simply validate her frustration or simply dismiss it. It holds both things at once. Mrs. Puff is genuinely suffering. She is also, occasionally, not entirely sympathetic in how she responds to that suffering. Both things are true, and the show, in its better moments, does not resolve the tension between them. People who love Mrs. Puff tend to sit inside that same unresolved tension in their own lives. The competence dimension of Mrs. Puff's character deserves careful attention because it is one of the things that makes her situation specifically painful rather than generically difficult. She is good at her job. This is not ambiguous the way Squidward's talent is ambiguous. Mrs. Puff has demonstrably taught every other student she has ever had. The method works. The curriculum works. The school works. It is specifically SpongeBob who presents a challenge that her professional skills cannot address. Not because those skills are insufficient in general, but because SpongeBob's particular combination of theoretical excellence and practical disaster is something the method was not designed for. She is competent meeting an incompatible situation, and the incompatibility reads, from the outside, as her failure, even though from any honest assessment, it is not her failure at all. That specific experience, being genuinely good at something, and having one situation that resists every application of that goodness in a way that is visible to other people and that gets attributed to you rather than to the situation, is one that a significant number of people carry around in silence. The doctor whose patient will not recover, the therapist whose client will not engage, the teacher whose student, for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the teaching, cannot reach the outcomes the system expects, the professional whose competence is real and whose results in this particular case are not, and who is required to absorb the gap between those two things without letting it redefine how they understand their own capability. Mrs. Puff absorbs this gap every single episode. She inflates when the stress becomes too much for her body to contain quietly. She deflates. She straightens her hat. She goes back to the classroom. There is something in Mrs. Puff's character that connects to the experience of people who came into a role, a job, a relationship, a caregiving situation with genuine optimism and genuine skill, and have watched that optimism erode over time, not because they became less capable or less committed, but because the situation kept producing outcomes that the optimism could not have predicted and that the skill could not prevent. The early seasons of Mrs. Puff, in the show's own internal timeline, are implied to have been more hopeful. She treats SpongeBob with patience and something approaching warmth in the first season. She believes, or allows herself to believe, that the next lesson might be the one that changes things, that whatever is happening when SpongeBob gets behind the wheel might be addressable through some adjustment in technique or approach or timing. By the time the show reaches its middle seasons, she has stopped believing this. Not loudly, not through any announcement or confrontation, stagnation. She has simply stopped. The hope has been replaced by something more professional and more defended, a going through the motions that is not laziness but armor, the armor of someone who learned, through repeated and costly experience, that allowing herself to fully invest in the possibility of a good outcome means fully experiencing the impact of a bad one, and that she cannot keep absorbing that impact at full strength and remain functional. People who love Mrs. Puff often know this armor intimately. They may call it different things: detachment, professionalism, realism, managing expectations. The specific flatness that settles over a person who has hoped for something enough times without result that hoping for it again feels less like optimism and more like a form of self-harm. It does not mean they have stopped caring. If anything, the armor is evidence of how much they care, because you do not build armor against things that cannot hurt you. The armor exists because the caring is still there, and the situation is still producing outcomes that cost the caring person something real each time they occur. Mrs. Puff's relationship with Mr. Krabs is worth noting because it provides the one area of her life where something functions the way it is supposed to. Their romantic relationship, inconsistently maintained across the series, but present in its better moments, suggests that Mrs. Puff has an existence outside the boating school that includes warmth and connection and something approaching ease. She is not only the exhausted professional, she is also a person with a life, with preferences and relationships, and a history that the show mostly leaves unexplored, but that occasionally surfaces in ways that remind the viewer she is more than the role she occupies in SpongeBob's story. That reminder matters because one of the things that happens to people in caregiving or high responsibility roles is that their identity outside those roles gradually becomes harder to access. They become the teacher, the parent, the caregiver, the manager, the professional, and the person who exists when none of those hats are being worn gets less and less time and space to be present. Mrs. Puff at the boating school and Mrs. Puff on a date with Mr. Krabs are visibly different people. Not dishonestly different, but the date version is softer, less defended, more available to the ordinary pleasures of an evening out. The boating school version has learned, through long experience, to keep something in reserve. People who love Mrs. Puff tend to recognize that split, the version of themselves that exists in the role versus the version that exists when the role is temporarily set down. The gap between those two versions can be energizing if the role is chosen and the setting down is frequent and easy. It can also be quietly exhausting if the role is inescapable and the setting down requires more effort than the person has left at the end of the day. The specific loneliness of Mrs. Puff's situation is that she cannot talk about it honestly in a way that will be received with full sympathy. SpongeBob is not malicious. He is not trying to make her life difficult. He loves her, in his way, with the specific and somewhat suffocating warmth he brings to all his relationships. And his love for Mrs. Puff is genuine, even as it is also, concurrently, the source of most of her professional and personal distress. This combination, being harmed by someone who loves you without meaning to harm you, who would be devastated to know the extent of the harm, who is not a villain but simply a person whose presence in your life has costs they are not equipped to see, is one of the more genuinely complicated emotional situations a person can occupy. It does not resolve cleanly. There is no version of the story where Mrs. Puff can say, "I need you to understand what this has cost me," and have SpongeBob receive that information in a way that produces meaningful change. SpongeBob would hear it and feel terrible and try harder, and the trying harder would produce more of the same outcomes, and the cycle would continue. So Mrs. Puff does not say it. She inflates, she deflates, she straightens her hat. This is also something that people in complicated caregiving relationships or difficult professional situations tend to do. They absorb what they cannot express. They contain what they cannot resolve. They show up the next day because showing up is the only responsible option available, and they carry the weight of what showing up has cost them in a place that is not visible to the people they are showing up for. What loving Mrs. Puff says about you is something that deserves to be received gently. It suggests that you are someone who has been responsible for things that were not your fault and could not be fixed by your effort, that you have shown up to situations that asked more of you than they had any right to ask, and that you have kept showing up not because the situation improved, but because you decided, somewhere early on, that you were the kind of person who shows up, and that decision has held even when everything around it has shifted. It suggests that your patience is real, and that it is not inexhaustible, and that there is probably a version of you that existed before the current responsibilities took up so much of the available space, a version that was softer and less defended, and more easily available to the ordinary ordinary pleasures of an ordinary evening, and that you miss that version sometimes, without knowing exactly how to get back to her. It suggests that you understand, in a way that does not require explanation to the people who share it, the specific exhaustion of caring about something that will not get better and continuing to care anyway. The particular weight of a role that defines you to the people around you in ways that do not capture everything you are. The strange dignity of the person who keeps going, not because the going is easy or rewarding or fairly compensated, but because the alternative is becoming someone who does not keep going, and that is not who you decided to be. Mrs. Puff inflates when it gets to be too much. She deflates. She straightens her hat. She goes back to the classroom. And the people who love her most do something very similar every single day in the specific situations that are theirs to manage and theirs alone. They absorb what they cannot say. They show up to what they cannot fix. They carry what they cannot set down, and they keep going because that is what they do. And because somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the armor and the long professional history of outcomes that did not match the effort, there is still a person who chose this, who decided that showing up mattered, who has not yet found sufficient reason to decide otherwise. That decision is not nothing. In fact, for the people who live inside it every day, it is just about everything. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next, we move away from the adults carrying adult weight and sit with the youngest character in Bikini Bottom's main cast, the one still trying to figure out who she is inside a family that never quite makes sense around her. Section 9, Pearl Krabs. There is a season 2 episode called Bossy Boots, where Mr. Krabs, in a rare moment of attempting to connect with his teenage daughter, gives Pearl a job at the Krusty Krab. He thinks it will make her happy. He thinks proximity to the thing he loves most, the restaurant, the business, the daily rhythm of the Krusty Krab, will translate into something she can share with him, some common ground between a father whose entire identity is built around a place, and a daughter who finds that place profoundly embarrassing. Pearl takes the job. She immediately begins redecorating. She renames the restaurant. She redesigns the menu. She replaces the aesthetic of everything her father has built with something that reflects her own taste, her own sense of what is appealing, her own vision of what the place could be if it were not so aggressively, so completely, so unapologetically her father. Mr. Krabs watches this happen with the specific expression of a person who offered something he valued and watched it get transformed into something he does not recognize. Pearl watches her father's expression and understands, in the way that teenagers understand things they cannot yet fully articulate, that the job was never really about her. It was about him, about his hope that she would look at the Krusty Krab the way he looks at it, that she would want what he wants, that the gap between who she is and who he imagined she might be could be closed through proximity to the thing he cares most about. The gap does not close. It never closes. Pearl goes back to being Pearl, and the Krusty Krab goes back to being the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs goes back to counting his money and not quite understanding his daughter, and Pearl goes back to her room in their home and her friends and the particular world she has built for herself that has almost nothing to do with the world her father inhabits. If Pearl Krabs is your favorite character, you probably already know which side of that episode you were watching from. Pearl Krabs is Mr. Krabs' daughter. She is a sperm whale, which the show has never explained and never intends to explain, and she is a teenager, which the show explains constantly through every detail of her characterization. She is tall, which in Bikini Bottom means she is taller than almost everyone around her, louder than the social situation frequently calls for, more emotionally expressive than the adults in her life find comfortable, and deeply, urgently concerned with things that Mr. Krabs does not understand and has never understood. Fashion, friends, social standing among her peer group, the specific texture of adolescent life in Bikini Bottom, which has its own hierarchies and currencies and anxieties that operate completely independently of anything happening at the Krusty Krab. She loves her father. This is not ambiguous. The show is careful, in its Better Pearl episodes, to make sure the love is visible beneath the embarrassment and the frustration and the teenager's particular talent for making the adults in her life feel inadequate at exactly the moments those adults most want to feel competent. Pearl does not want a different father. She wants this father to understand her, which is a significantly more painful thing to want because it is so much harder to achieve and so much more personal when it fails. The failing happens constantly, not because Mr. Krabs does not care about Pearl. He does, in the specific way that people who express love primarily through provision and protection, care about the people they are responsible for. He works to give her what she needs. He shows up in the ways he knows how to show up. He tries, in episodes like Whale of a Birthday, to throw her a birthday party that matches her expectations. And the trying is genuine, even when the execution is catastrophically, almost impressively wrong. He buys her a cardboard cake. He hires a band that played her party 20 years ago. He decorates with streamers from the clearance bin. Every decision is made through the filter of cost, rather than through the filter of what Pearl actually wanted. And the result is a party that communicates, without anyone having to say it, that the person who organized it does not know her very well. Pearl cries. Mr. Krabs is confused by the crying. The gap between them opens a little wider, and neither of them has the language to name what is in the gap, so they do not name it. And the episode resolves through SpongeBob's intervention, rather than through any genuine understanding passing between father and daughter. People who love Pearl Krabs tend to know that gap from the inside. There is a specific experience that belongs to people who grew up in families where the love was real and the understanding was incomplete, where the people who were responsible for them cared genuinely, but expressed that caring in ways that did not quite match what was needed, where the provisions were adequate and the affection was present in its way, and the effort was visible, and something was still missing, something harder to name than food or shelter or money, something closer to being known, being seen as who you actually are, rather than as the role you occupy in someone else's story, being understood in the specific texture of your particular preferences and anxieties and enthusiasms, rather than in the general category of child or daughter or the person I am responsible for. Pearl occupies a unique position in Bikini Bottom that goes beyond the simple teenager embarrassed by parent dynamic. Though that dynamic is real and the show uses it consistently, she is also genuinely, structurally out of place in her own family in a way that has nothing to do with attitude or ingratitude or the ordinary friction of adolescence. She is a whale. Her father is a crab. The biological mismatch is never explained, and the show seems to find the unexplainedness of it funny rather than troubling, but it also functions as a visual metaphor for something emotionally real. Pearl is not quite the right shape for the container she was born into. She is bigger than the Krusty Krab can accommodate. Her needs and her aesthetics and her way of being in the world do not match the environment that formed her, and she is old enough to feel that mismatch, but not yet old enough to fully understand what to do with it. That feeling, the feeling of being too much for the space you grew up in, is one that a very specific and very large group of people carry with them long after they have technically left the space. It is not always a feeling of superiority. It is not about thinking you are better than where you came from. It is about the particular discomfort of being a shape that does not quite fit the available containers, being louder than the family register, being more emotionally expressive than the family norm, caring about things that the family does not have a framework for valuing, wanting a kind of recognition that the family is not equipped to provide, not because they are bad people, but because the gap between what they know how to give and what you need to receive is genuinely wide, and bridging it would require both parties to travel toward each other in ways that neither has yet managed. Pearl's social world, her friendships, her enthusiasm for fashion and popular culture, and the things that make up teenage life in Bikini Bottom is where she makes the most sense. With her friends, she is not too much. She is exactly the right amount of everything. Her enthusiasm is matched. Her aesthetic sensibility is shared, or at least appreciated. Her emotional expressiveness is not read as excess, but as normal participation in the shared language of teenage girlhood. She belongs there in a way that she does not quite belong in the Krusty Krab, and the show, when it follows Pearl into her social world, rather than keeping her in the frame of her relationship with her father, gives her a completeness that the Krusty Krab episodes do not quite achieve. This pattern, finding belonging in a chosen community that fits better than the family of origin, is one that people who love Pearl tend to understand well. The family is not the enemy. The love is real. But home, in the fullest sense of the word, the place where you are the right size and the right shape and do not have to manage yourself downward to fit, is sometimes somewhere other than where you started. Sometimes it is built from chosen relationships rather than inherited ones. Sometimes it takes until you are old enough to find it. Pearl is not old enough yet. She is still in the process of becoming. She is still living inside the tension between the family she has and the self she is figuring out, still navigating the gap between who her father needs her to be and who she is discovering herself to be, still working out how to love the people she comes from without losing the thread of who she is in the process of loving them. The show show does not resolve this for her. It gives her moments of clarity and moments of genuine connection with Mr. Krabs, and then it returns her to the ongoing negotiation, because the ongoing negotiation is where the real story lives, and because the show understands, even if it does not always foreground this understanding, that Pearl's story is not finished yet. She is mid-becoming. The most interesting things about her are still ahead of her, in a life that the show mostly does not show, and that Pearl herself can only partially imagine. People who love Pearl often feel the same way about their own story. They are people who are aware that they are still becoming, who have not yet arrived at the version of themselves that will make full sense of everything that came before, who carry the family they came from and the person they are building simultaneously, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in friction, navigating the ongoing work of figuring out who you are when the containers you started in were not quite the right shape. There is something important in Pearl's relationship with embarrassment that deserves direct attention, because embarrassment is one of the dominant emotional registers of her character, and it is worth understanding what it is actually about. Pearl is embarrassed by her father. This is established early and maintained consistently, but the embarrassment is not simple contempt. It is not the embarrassment of someone who thinks they are better than the person embarrassing them, though it can look like that from the outside. It is the embarrassment of someone who loves the embarrassing person and is therefore personally implicated in how that person appears to the world. Pearl's embarrassment about Mr. Krabs is partly about his cheapness and his obliviousness and his complete failure to understand teenage social dynamics, but it is also, underneath those surface things, about a deeper discomfort, the discomfort of being seen through the lens of someone who does not fully see you, of having your identity partially defined in the eyes of the people around you by your relationship to a person whose public presentation does not match your own sense of who you are. This is a very common experience for people who grew up in families where something about the family's presentation, their financial situation, their behavior in public, their values, their aesthetic, their way of engaging with the world created a gap between how the family appeared to others and how the person growing up inside the family understood themselves. The gap produces a specific kind of social discomfort that is not about shame exactly, because shame would require a rejection of the family that most people who love their families are not willing to make. It is more like a constant low-level management of the distance between who you are and who the family makes you look like to people who only see the family from the outside. Pearl manages this distance constantly. She loves her father and she finds him mortifying, and both of these things are completely true simultaneously, and she has not yet found a clean way to hold them together that does not require her to split herself between the two. People who love Pearl have often spent significant portions of their lives holding that same split, the love and the mortification, the belonging and the not quite fitting, the gratitude for what the family provided and the ongoing awareness of what the family could not, the deep desire to be understood by the people who are supposed to know you best, and the slowly accumulating evidence that that particular understanding may require more work from both parties than either has yet been willing to do. What Pearl's character captures most precisely, and what makes her resonate with the people who choose her, is the specific emotional texture of being midway, not the child who simply accepts the family's version of the world, not yet the adult who has built their own world and made their peace with the family from a position of established selfhood, the person who is in the process of the transition, who is figuring out which parts of where they came from to carry forward and which parts to put down, who is building the self slowly and sometimes clumsily and with a great deal of noise because the building is genuinely difficult and she has not done it before, and there is no instruction manual for becoming who you are when who you are is still taking shape. The crying at the cardboard cake is not just about the cake. The crying is about being known, about wanting more than the good party or the right decorations or the brand new decorations that did not come from the clearance bin, to be the kind of person whose father understands what she needs without having to be told, to be known well enough that the guessing is unnecessary, to be loved in the specific, accurate, textured way rather than in the general, approximate, well-intentioned way that is the best some people can manage and that falls just short of what is actually needed. Pearl has not given up on being known by her father. She keeps trying. She keeps showing up to the Krusty Krab and to the birthday parties and to the relationship with all its limitations and all its genuine warmth. And she keeps hoping that the next attempt will be the one where the gap closes a little, where something real passes between them, where the love that is undeniably present finds a form that both of them can actually feel. What loving Pearl says about you is something that belongs to the part of you that is still becoming, still working out the distance between who you are and where you came from, still negotiating the relationship between the family that formed you and the self you are building, still holding the love and the friction and the wanting to be known and the not quite being known in the same hands without dropping any of it. It suggests that you are someone who feels things loudly, possibly more loudly than the people around you find comfortable, and that you have not yet fully made your peace with that loudness, or fully decided to simply let it be what it is without apology, that you carry a desire to be understood by the people who are supposed to know you best, and that the gap between that desire and the current reality is something you are still actively sitting inside, rather than something you have resolved and moved on from. It suggests that you are somewhere in the middle of your own story, that the most clarifying things have not yet happened, that the version of yourself that will eventually look back at this period and understand it fully is still ahead of you, still being assembled from the materials that are currently available, which are sufficient, even if they do not always feel like it. Pearl is a whale in a Krabs restaurant in an underwater town, trying to figure out who she is and what she wants, and how to love the people she comes from without losing herself in the process. The people who love her most are doing something very similar, in their own towns, in their own families, in their own ongoing, unresolved, mid-becoming lives. They have not arrived yet, neither has she, and there is something quietly reassuring about that shared incompleteness, about the fact that the becoming does not have to be finished to be real, about the fact that you can be exactly who Pearl is, loud and unresolved and still figuring it out, and that can be enough. That can be more than enough. That can be exactly where you are supposed to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now we step back from every individual character and look at what these choices reveal about why Bikini Bottom has felt like home to so many people for so long, and what the show understood about human nature before its audience fully did. Section 10. What Bikini Bottom says about all of us. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who grew up watching SpongeBob SquarePants. It happens at different ages for different people, sometimes in their late teens, sometimes in their 20s, sometimes later than that, when life has had enough time to accumulate the specific weight that adulthood tends to accumulate. They are watching an episode they have seen before, one they watched as a child and laughed at without thinking too hard about why they were laughing, and something shifts. The episode is the same, the animation is the same, the voices are the same, but something in the watching is different, because the person watching is different, and the difference has made certain things visible that were not visible before. The joke that landed as pure absurdity at 8 years old now lands as something more complicated. The character who seemed simply funny now seems also unmistakably sad. The moment that produced a laugh now produces a laugh and something underneath the laugh that does not have a clean name, but that feels like recognition, like the show knew something about what life was going to feel like before the person watching it had any way of knowing that themselves. Like Bikini Bottom was not just a cartoon setting, but a map of something real, drawn in the language of sea creatures and underwater restaurants, and a pineapple house on a street where everyone is slightly too much of themselves, because that was the only language available that could hold what needed to be said without saying it so directly that the audience would not be able to receive it. This moment, this shift in the watching, is not an accident. It is what Steven Hillenburg built. Hillenburg was a marine biologist before he was an animator. He understood ocean ecosystems not as backdrops, but as communities, intricate and interdependent systems where every organism has a function, and every function connects to every other function in ways that are not always visible from any single vantage point. When he designed Bikini Bottom, he was not simply creating a funny underwater setting for cartoon adventures. He was building a community in the ecological sense, a place where the characters were not just funny individuals, but a system of relationships, each one illuminating the others, each one incomplete without the context the others provide. SpongeBob without Squidward is optimism without friction. Squidward without SpongeBob is longing without the reminder of what uncomplicated joy looks like. Patrick without SpongeBob is ease without purpose. Sandy without the rest of Bikini Bottom is competence without the environment that tests it. Mr. Krabs without Pearl is accumulation without consequence. Plankton without Mr. Krabs is ambition without a worthy obstacle. Gary without SpongeBob is steadiness without anyone to be steady for. Mrs. Puff without SpongeBob is capability without the situation that reveals its limits. Pearl without Mr. Krabs is becoming without the thing being become away from. None of them make complete sense alone. All of them make complete sense together. And the viewer who has spent years with these characters, who has watched the relationships between them evolve and strain and occasionally break and repair, has been absorbing something about the nature of community that is more sophisticated than most children's television attempts to convey, and more honest than most adult television manages to be. The question this video set out to answer was a specific and personal one. What does your favorite SpongeBob character say about you? And the answer, across 9 sections and 9 characters, has been consistent in a way worth naming directly. The character you return to is not arbitrary. It is not simply the one you find funniest, or the one with the best lines, or the one whose design appeals most to you aesthetically, though all of those things may be true as well. It is the one who reflects back something real about how you experience being a person, about where you feel the friction between who you are and what the world asks of you, about what you value and what you are afraid of, and what you are still working out, and what you have decided, quietly and without ceremony, to keep going toward anyway. SpongeBob people carry the weight of their own caring. They love generously and work hard and keep showing up, and sometimes absorb more than they should because the alternative requires a self-protection that does not come naturally to them. Patrick people carry a relationship with simplicity and rest that the world keeps trying to complicate, and they find in Patrick's uncomplicated existence a permission they struggle to grant themselves. Squidward people carry a creative wound, a belief in something about themselves that the world has not yet confirmed, and a loneliness that comes from living at the distance between who you know you are and what the available evidence currently shows. Sandy people carry the particular exhaustion of having had to prove it over and over in spaces that were not built for them, to people who kept acting surprised by what they were capable of, with a competence that is real and an identity that is portable, and a homesickness for ease that never quite goes away. Mr. Krabs people carry a pragmatism built on a history of scarcity, a relationship with security that can never be entirely relaxed, a respect for the people who build things from nothing that comes from knowing, at some level, what nothing actually feels like. Plankton people carry the specific dignity of the person who keeps going, not because the results justify the continuing, but because stopping would require accepting a verdict they are not willing to accept. Gary people carry the weight of being the anchor, the steady one, the constant presence that everyone builds their sense of home around, without always remembering to fill the bowl. Mrs. Puff people carry the accumulated cost of showing up to situations that have taken more from them than anyone has properly accounted for, and the complicated pride of the person who keeps going anyway because showing up is who they decided to be. Pearl people carry the mid-becoming, the unresolved negotiation between where they came from and who they are building, the ongoing desire to be known well enough that the guessing is unnecessary. These are not small things. None of them are small. And the fact that a cartoon about a sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea has been carrying all of them simultaneously across more than 25 years of continuous broadcast, across generations of children who grew up and came back and found the show still there with something new to show them, is worth sitting with for a moment before this video ends. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered on May 1st, 1999 on Nickelodeon. It was not the first animated show to take its audience seriously, and it was not the last, but it may be the one that has sustained that seriousness most quietly, most consistently, over the longest period of time and across the widest range of ages. The children who watched the first episode in 1999 are adults now. Some of them are parents who have watched their own children discover Bikini Bottom for the first time and felt something complicated and warm watching the discovery happen. The show has outlasted most of what was on television when it began. It has outlasted cultural moments and platform shifts and the death of its creator and the changing of its creative leadership and 2 movies and a spin-off and a Broadway musical and more merchandise than any single inventory could contain. It has outlasted all of these things because Hillenburg built something that the audience could grow with rather than simply out of. Most children's television is designed to be appropriate for children, which is a worthy goal, but a limiting one. SpongeBob was designed to be true to how communities work, how relationships strain and repair, how ambition and disappointment and loyalty and loneliness and joy all coexist in the same small geography without resolving into a single dominant feeling. True to how people are complicated in specific ways rather than general ones. True to the experience of being exactly exactly who you are in an environment that did not design itself around your particular shape. Every character in Bikini Bottom is too much of something. SpongeBob is too enthusiastic. Squidward is too sensitive. Patrick is too simple. Sandy is too capable. Mr. Krabs is too acquisitive. Plankton is too persistent. Gary is too quiet. Mrs. Puff is too strained. Pearl is too loud. And in a different kind of show, in a show that was more concerned with making its characters legible and comfortable than with making them true, these excesses would be smoothed down. The too much would be calibrated into something more manageable, more universally appealing, more careful not to push any individual quality far enough that it might make anyone uncomfortable. Hillenburg did not smooth them down. He pushed them further. He made the enthusiasm almost unbearable, and the sensitivity almost insufferable, and the simplicity almost frightening, and the capability almost alienating. And in doing so, he created characters who feel like people in the way that very few animated characters have ever managed to feel like people. Not because they are realistic. They are not realistic at all. A sponge in square pants is not realistic. But because the emotional logic underneath the absurdity is precise, and precision in emotional logic is what makes characters feel true, regardless of the surface form they take. The people who love these characters most are not loving the animation, though the animation in the early seasons is extraordinary in its craft and specificity. They are not loving the jokes, though the jokes are frequently brilliant. They are loving the recognition, the feeling of watching a character and thinking, without being able to fully explain why, that this is something that knows what it is like to be me, that understands the specific texture of this particular way of being a person, that has seen, through some creative miracle, the part of my interior life that I have never found the right words for, and has given it a voice and a face and a home on a street under the ocean where everyone is slightly too much of themselves and nobody is required to be less. That is what Hillenburg gave. That is what Bikini Bottom has been quietly providing across all the years and all the seasons and all the cultural moments to the people who needed it. A place where being too much of something is not a problem to be corrected. It is just who you are, and who you are is enough to live there. The show understood something else, something that only becomes fully visible when you look at all the characters together rather than individually. It understood that people do not choose their favorite character randomly. They choose the one that sees them, and being seen, genuinely and specifically, and without requirement to be different, is one of the things that human beings need most and find hardest to come by in the ordinary run of their lives. Bikini Bottom offers it freely. It has always offered it freely. To the child watching on a Saturday morning who does not yet have the words for why Squidward's face in Band Geeks makes them feel something large and quiet in their chest. To the adult watching at midnight who finds in Gary's patient waiting by the empty bowl a mirror held up to something in their own life they have been trying to name for a long time. To everyone in between, at every age, in every version of themselves, who came back to the pineapple and the Easter Island head and the Krusty Krab and the rock across the street and found that the show still had something to show them. What your favorite SpongeBob character says about you is not a diagnosis. It is not a verdict. It is not a complete picture of who you are, because no single character and no single preference can contain a complete picture of who anyone is. What it is a point of recognition, a small and specific piece of evidence about where you feel most seen and most understood, and most like the version of yourself that does not have to be explained or justified or made more comfortable for other people. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is exactly enough. Bikini Bottom has been there for 25 years. It will be there tomorrow. And whenever you need to go back, whenever the world has been too much and the bowl is empty and the clarinet is out of tune and the plan has failed again and the boating test is not going well and the birthday cake is made of cardboard and the tree dome is running low on air and the paddleball record does not seem as important as it did this morning, it will be waiting. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.